Good morning everyone and welcome to the WA Museum in Geraldton for another one of our Harry Butler in the Wild West International Year of Biodiversity lectures. This morning we have Diana Jones, the Executive Director of Collections and Content from the Western Australian Museum. She's also a crustacean biologist and a co-author on a book on crustaceans of Australian waters. Her research has specialised in crabs of mangrove regions and barnacles, which is what we're here to hear about today. She's done fieldwork throughout Australia and Asia and worked extensively in European museums. Di has also specialised in multidisciplinary international research partnerships, most recently heading the award-winning partnership with Woodside Energy to document the marine biodiversity of the Dampier archipelago. And please welcome Di Jones. She talks about Darwin's animals, barnacles.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for coming today. And I want to tell you about barnacles. And I think barnacles are things that perhaps people love or they hate. And if you're a boat owner in the audience, you probably are saying, oh my goodness me, those pesky barnacles. But I'm hoping with this talk that I can actually convert you into thinking about them as beautiful barnacles at the end of it all. So could we have the first slide, please? So barnacles, for most people, they're the ones that you see on shores. They're the little animals that look a bit like volcanoes. On this slide here we've got some pictures of barnacles where you'd find them on the shore, and the barnacles you find on shores are called Acorn Barnacles. They're called Acorn Barnacles because some people think that they look like the fruit of the oak tree. They come in a variety of different shapes and sizes, but not only do you find barnacles on the shores, you find a whole range of barnacles in a lot of other different habitats, which I'll be telling you about, and they come in different shapes and sizes as well. So I thought I'd talk to start this talk by telling you a little bit about the life cycle of barnacles, because they have quite a strange life cycle. They have a series of larvae, and they start off with a larvae called a nauplius, which is this little animal up here. This is what it looks like under the microscope. It's released into the water column from the fertilised egg. It comes from the fertilised egg. And in fact, there are six different changes of the nauplius. It sheds its skin, it molts, and it has 6 different forms. But it's always got swimming legs on it. These help it to float in the water column, and quite often it can have something like yolk inside it, so it gives it longevity, so it can stay in the water column drifting on currents for quite a long time, which the idea is to disperse and to find an area where it can settle. So it then changes to the last stage when it becomes what we call a cyprid larvae, and this actually has like 2 little shells, so it has some legs and it has some antennae, and this is again what it looks like under a microscope. The legs mean that when the cyprid finds a hard surface, barnacles always settle on a hard surface, so it can crawl around and find the best place to settle. And then when it settles, it stands on its head, and with the 2 little antennae, they go down, and from the antennae it secretes some cement, a very, very strong cement, and that sets very quickly. And once that's set, the animal stays there for life. And then there are a series of changes in the animal which forms the barnacle. The next one, please, Catherine. So the adult barnacle or the acorn barnacle, looks like this. This is it from above, and it's basically a shell which is composed of a number of really tight-fitting plates. It makes a nice little sort of box, and it has a little base, and that base can either be made of calcareous material or it can be a membranous base. But it also has a lid in the middle here, and it's a movable lid, so that lid can actually open. And when it opens, the animal is inside, the soft animal inside, and these little legs come out, and they're the feeding legs. And the Latin name for barnacles is cirripede, and cirrus means curly and pede means foot, so it's basically curly feet. And this is the animal, and this is the thorax region of the animal, and these are the legs coming off the thorax. And there, on each side of the animal there are 6 pairs of legs. And these legs are made of a number of segments, but they have a lot of hairs that come off the segments. And so it sticks the legs out, and they come out like this, and they form what they call a feeding net, and these legs all splay out. So you've got 24 parts making up your feeding net, and you have the little hairs in between, and these wave around in the current, and any food that comes along sticks onto these legs. And the legs can curl over, and the mouth parts come and they comb off the food, and then it goes into their stomach. So that's how the feeding net works. Barnacles are hermaphroditic, and which means they have male and female sex organs. But because it's better not to self-fertilise, they have to reach to their mate, and they're renowned as having the longest penis in the world compared to its size for any animal, because obviously if you're in a fixed state, you have to reach across, so they have this dubious character or reputation of having the longest in the world. This is a barnacle that was dissected, so that it just is showing these plates. These 2 plates here are these 2 large plates here, and this is the animal inside with these little legs beginning to come out, start to make the feeding net. I'll just put this one in here because sometimes, although I said barnacles are hermaphroditic, in some animals, especially when species that live in the deep sea, they actually become more and more female. The main animal becomes female, and the maleness of the animal is formed into what we call a dwarf male. This is a little dwarf male, and they can often sit on the outside here of the animal and actually fertilise the animal inside like that. That's a very specialised form, but it often happens in some of the deep sea forms, because in deep sea forms you often have only very isolated individuals, not very near other individuals, and so that's the only way that they can reproduce. This is just a close-up picture of some of those plates that you saw, and I've just put that in because the way that we classify barnacles and work out which species is which is often on the type of the form of these plates, the shape, the ornamentation, the way the muscles attach, and this is one of the ways we determine, or one of the features where something might be a new species, we describe this. This was just to show you what these feeding cirri or legs look like. These are the ones which are near the mouth, just a diagrammatic representation. That's what it looks like under the microscope. The ones near the mouth are sort of quite hairy, because they're the ones which are transferring the food to the mouth and have been scraping off some of this food from the other cirri. The cirri more away from the mouth, say some of these hind ones, they are the ones that have the very, very long hairs or setae on them. They're the food gathering ones. That's what they look like under the microscope. And these are the mouth parts. Now this is a barnacle. This is called a Storked Barnacle. So I've talked about Acorn Barnacles. Acorn Barnacles are really the most advanced form of barnacle. The most primitive barnacles are Storked Barnacles. Stalked because they have this long stalk here. But really, if you can imagine the stalk taken off, that's really what the Acorn Barnacle is. That's what's happened in evolution. The stalk has been lost and you get the Acorn Barnacle. But they all have very similar mouth parts. Some of them have big teeth on them, and some here for combing out some of the fine material. And they have 4 sets altogether of mouth parts. And again, they're diagnosis for different species. And some of the Storked Barnacles, as I said, they're the most primitive barnacles. And a lot of them, the majority of them, have lots of these plates on their stalks. They're called armoured plates. There are some which I'll show you later on which actually don't have those plates on them, but the majority do. They were around. They were evolved during the time when the fish were very much evolving, and the theory is that they put these plates. They developed these plates on their stalks to stop predation from fish coming along and eating them. Barnacles have been around for over 400 million years, which is pre-dinosaurs. So, and they're still here today. So they're the most successful group of animals. I mean, they've outlived the dinosaurs and things like that, but they've been around a long time. So they've obviously got a very successful lifestyle. And with these deep water barnacles, which tend to be these Storked Barnacles, you have a very large variety of forms and sizes, and again, the way the plates are arranged on the head of the barnacle, and whether there are these spaces in between or whether they actually cover the whole plate. And some of the plates are rather beautiful. That's the way we classify them to find different species, to define the different species. And these are some of the Storked Barnacles which have these naked stalks. These are the ones that if you're a fisherman or a boat person, you'd often find these stuck to your boats, or if you've got buoys out in the sea, you'll often find these barnacles on them. Why I've got pictures of geese here is because these are called Storked Barnacles, but they're also called Goose Barnacles as a common name. And the name Goose Barnacle evolved from a myth in the medieval times. And the myth originated from people finding logs or bits of trees on the shore which had been floating around in the sea, which actually had these barnacles on them. But people saw the barnacles and they thought that the barnacles were actually the fruit of the tree. And as well as it being so, here are some of these Goose Barnacles here. This is actually on the bottom of a boat, but this is what they would have looked like. And you can see that the little feeding legs have come out here. When people saw these feeding legs, they actually believed that they were the tail feathers of a bird, which does sound really bizarre. And they thought it was the tail feathers of a particular goose, which they then called the Barnacle Goose. And this is the Barnacle Goose. And they named it the Barnacle Goose because they saw a resemblance between this and this. And in fact, they also believed that the thick stalk was the neck of a goose. So it's a pretty bizarre myth, but people believed that. And for many, many, many centuries, people believed that these hatched out into geese. And I just put the pictures of the barnacle geese up just to show you, but obviously it's rather bizarre. Okay, next. There's a third group of barnacles too. I've talked about the Storked Barnacles, which are the very primitive ones, and then the Acorn Barnacles, which are the very advanced ones. These are the ones in the middle, all but this one. This plate here shows you this group, which are called the Wart Barnacles. They're a very rare group of barnacles. You find them mainly in the deep sea, very few species in shallow water. They are like the Acorn Barnacle, but instead of having a lid which has 4 plates, it only has 2 plates. So it's a bit, if you imagine a trinket box with a little lid that pops up, that's what a Wart Barnacle's like. They often have this beautiful sculpturing on their plates. So this is the little lid here, and this is the wall of the barnacle down here. And they can be found sometimes at very, very great depths. This one, for instance, comes from hydrothermal vents from about something like 4,000 metres depth. But they're quite common from anywhere from 200 metres right down to about 6,000 metres. So they're the sort of intermediate between the Storked Barnacles and the Acorn Barnacles. So, as I said, these are the Acorn Barnacles. These are mainly found in shallow waters, but there are a few which you do find in deep waters. This this group here, that's a new species that I described from the waters of New Caledonia, and they're from about 500 metres depth. But anything much below that depth, you don't get many of these acorn barnacles. They tend to be a shore barnacle. Thanks. So barnacles are marine. You don't find them in freshwater. You do find them in rivers where you do get a tidal influence in the river. So, for instance, in the river in Perth, in the summer months when we've had no rain, the river's quite marine, and so up to summer, like the racecourse, Belmont racecourse, you're going to find barnacles in the river. But in the winter, as soon as you get rain and a wedge of fresh water comes down, it washes down all over the barnacles, and you don't find any barnacles that are alive and anywhere after Stirling Traffic Bridge, so right down at Fremantle. So the river's quite dynamic in that sense, and the barnacles each year have to recolonise up into the river. So you find them, you can find them in estuarine conditions, but you don't find them in fresh water, and they're obviously not terrestrial. As I said, you can find them floating on objects in the sea, and almost anywhere in the ocean. If you drop something over the edge, you'll find that you get barnacle larvae attaching, and barnacles will grow on it, and obviously boat owners know that only too well. And you get them on the shore, and then down onto the shallow, this is the continental shelf, and then continental slope right down to abyssal layers. In this area you get the acorn barnacles. They literally dominate the shores. In fact, today we call this the Age of Barnacles, because anywhere you go in the world you'll find barnacles on the shores, and it can be in the tropics, it can be temperate areas, it can be in Antarctica, it can be in the Arctic. You'll find barnacles on the shore, and there'll be those little volcanic barnacles. But as you get down to about 200 metres depth, you get the Storked Barnacles very much more becoming dominant. And when you get to these depths, the Storked Barnacles really do take over, and you get very, very few of the little volcanic barnacles. And I said that barnacles settle on hard substrates, and when you get into these areas, the substrate's extremely soft on the continental shelf and margins. It's very, it's a bit like liquid plasticine almost. You see a level which you think is going to be solid, and in fact you can go right down into it. So it's a very soft environment. So the Storked Barnacles that you get in these environments, they either attach to the shells of some of the mollusks that live in those areas, or they'll attach to the fish or to other crustaceans, say prawns or scampi or something like that. So they're quite successful at finding little habitats and exploiting all the habitats that are available, that are possibly available to them. And they can even get into things like the gill cavities of crabs or lobsters and actually live on the gills. So they really do exploit every possible thing that you could call a bit of a hard surface. So, as I said, the Age of Barnacles, barnacles living on the shore. But in WA, barnacles are not particularly conspicuous because we have such harsh environments. We have these, especially in the southwest, we have microtidal environments, so the tide doesn't really move very much. And also, we have extremely hot summers. So this is Albany, and you can see here these barnacles. They are only surviving in the area that's in the shadow of this rock. They're not out here on this bare rock. Some barnacles live out in the surf zones. This is this barnacle, which is actually in the surf zone, so they have this constant pounding water. So they're not really exposed very much to the air, so they live very well in that environment. The ones that do live exposed on the rocks are usually in areas in WA which are at low tide levels, so that they're not here in the upper tidal levels being exposed for a long time, because they just wouldn't survive. So it's not exactly barnacle paradise on the beaches in WA. Just to show you, although I said that you don't get many barnacles in the Acorn Barnacles in those deeper waters. This is a suite of barnacles that actually do come from deeper waters, and again it's from New Caledonia, from the work I was doing on the barnacles there, and these all come from between 200, 500, 800 metres, and they were all, apart from this one, they were all new species. In fact, this is a new family, so in deep water when you get material, it usually means it's going to be all new because there's been so little exploration done in those areas. This one's particularly exciting. It's one that's just recently been sent to me, and it's from the Indian Ocean, from some very deep areas there, about 3,000 metres, on an ocean ridge, which is an area where the continental, if you've heard of the continental plates that all the land sits on, and in the Indian Ocean, this particular ridge is formed by one of the plates going underneath one of the others, and you get a release of magma from the Earth's crust that comes up, and you form what we call hydrothermal vents, and you have sulfide and lots of other things escaping up from the magma of the Earth. So it's a very different chemical area, very different set of environmental conditions, and it's very deep water. Now this is the first Acorn Barnacle that's been found in hydrothermal vents in the Indian Ocean. So we're going to describe it, and it's a very primitive. I can tell because it's got all these different plates making up its walls. So its walls not made up of just a few plates like these barnacles. This is a whole series of little plates, which tells me it's primitive, and it's like things which we know are in the fossil record, but we haven't found them as in the living record. So it's going to be fun looking at this barnacle, but scary because there's only one of them. So makes sense. These, the gooseneck barnacles. Now, as I said, you get the ones that sort of hop on boats, which are the ones, if you've got boats, you know very well would look like this, and this is like this. But you've also got other animals like Janthina. This is a mollusk which makes its own bubble raft, and it floats around in the ocean, and these barnacles have attached to Janthina, so they're hitching a ride. These are the Goose Barnacles, as I said, you often find on the shore, on pieces of wood. You often find those, say, in the winter, especially after storms. But you also get barnacles like this one, and although this one's on a boat, this one too, which live on some of our big marine mammals. So these two you often find on whales, for instance. So this is a Storked Barnacle. These are its cirri coming out. But this particular barnacle has two big bulges on top of its head. It's a peculiar looking animal, and it's one that I'm often sent specimens of because people think it's some sort of alien creature on their boat. And in fact this is from Peri Banu, which was John Sanders' boat, which did the double circumnavigation of the ocean. And when they brought the boat into Royal, I think it was Royal Perth Yacht Club, they took it out of the water, and there were all these amazing animals hanging off it. And of course they were all still alive, so they were all putting their little cirri out, and nobody knew what they were, so they rang up the museum, and I went down to look at them, by which time they had them in the bar in a great big goblet, and they were all, doing their thing. And there were a group of quite drunk people watching them, making all sorts of strange comments, but it was really quite funny. But we've now got these preserved in our collection. I did say that some of these barnacles do attach to things like crustaceans, and this is this particular Stork Barnacle. That's one that you very often find on things like scampi at depths between about 200, 500 metres depths, or some of the deep water crabs. But they nearly always have something like this or a similar species on it. Often very much attached near their mouth parts, because near the mouth parts of the animal that they're hitching a ride on, because that's a good place to be for these animals to find their own food. And I've talked about hydrothermal vents, and these two Storked Barnacles are actually from hydrothermal vents. And this is one I described many years ago, from hydrothermal vents which are off the west coast of America, in fact, the USA, quite near San Diego, the San Andreas, just off that area. And this one has fairly recently been described by a colleague of mine, and again, that one is exactly like something that we knew from the fossil record, and then it's popped up again in a hydrothermal vent. So, I mean, and you can see that this one is amazingly armoured on its peduncle, on its stalk. Now, put this one in because this is actually a really, you can see this 1 millimetre sign here. So this is a very, very small Storked Barnacle. This comes from off the northwest shelf, about 200 nautical miles about west of Port Hedland, in about 300 metres of water. And it's living on some sort of algae. And we, at the museum last year, to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the birth of Charles Darwin, we produced a volume in commemoration of that. And Charles Darwin, as I'll talk about a little bit later, had a great affinity with barnacles. And he did a lot of work on barnacles. And so we described this species, and we called it, its Latin name is Calantica darwini. And it was the first species in this volume we did on new species, because it was fitting that to celebrate Charles Darwin we had a barnacle. Then one of our big funding bodies, our scientific funding bodies last year, to celebrate Darwin, decided that they would choose 10 new species, or 10 species that had been described, new species in Australia, and they'd run a competition for people to say which was the best new species. And they asked us to put this barnacle in, but they said, you have to give it a common name because nobody's going to remember Calantica darwini. So we called it the Opera House Barnacle. So last month there was voting. We're waiting with bated breath to see if we've got anywhere near it. But last month there was voting. People voted online for the best name. But I think one of the other species was a frog, and it was called Crikey Steve Irwini. So I think we had a little bit of competition there. So we're not quite sure, but we're still hoping. Okay. So as I said, but these barnacles, when they get into deeper water, and usually Stork Barnacles, they can live on a variety of animals and surfaces. So I've just gave a few examples here. So a mollusk shell with an acorn barnacle on it, but that's on a hermit crab is already looking in after that shell, and that's from about 200 metres, that one. This is actually a Stork Barnacle that lives in shallow water, and you find this off Perth in about 4 or 5 metres of water. This is a museum specimen, and you lose colour when you preserve specimens. But this, in real life, is a bright purple claret colour, and it's if it's on the shore and it's been washed up, it's very vivid. It's very beautiful. And this barnacle was one of the barnacles actually found by Charles Darwin when he came through Western Australia on the Beagle in 1835. Whales have lots and lots and lots of barnacles on them, and in fact people talk about take photographs of whales and try and identify whales by the pattern of the barnacles on them. And this is the barnacle, the Storked Barnacle with the funny ears that I showed you previously. Again, a museum specimen, so a bit dried out. But this is another barnacle that lives on whales, which causes these scars here. And it's called Coronular diadema. It's quite a big barnacle, and it's called diadema because when you can actually see it without these barnacles on it, it is quite like a little crown. It's quite beautiful. This is the fin of a dolphin, and you can see there's some barnacles on the edge of there. And then a turtle with barnacles on its carapace. And there are known instances where turtles have drowned because of the weight of the barnacles actually on the carapace of the turtle. And then these are corals with barnacles on. This is the barnacle is in this area here, then here it's opened out and it almost looks like a little flower, but these are its feeding cirri. And you can see these are extremely, extremely fine. And this is another type of coral barnacle here, which is a much more robust, and it tends to sit on top of the coral. But coral barnacles, there are many, many, many different types of coral barnacles. You can also find barnacles in sponges and in all sorts of really strange places. I put the turtle up again. This is the turtle obviously turned over because they're depending on which part of the turtle you're looking at, you can have different species of barnacles. So this is actually different species to the ones we saw before on the carapace. And there are also other barnacles which you get on the actual fins of the actual animal, or the limbs of the animal. And even the most bizarre place for a barnacle to live, I think, is in the soft palate of the loggerhead turtles. They often have a barnacle in there. Now, in terms of lifestyle, how you get there, why you would do it, it seems bizarre. You know, how do you find a mate from there? But we have quite a few barnacles which have been taken from that area. They even grow, and this is a leaf of a mangrove tree. They even grow on mangrove trees, and you can find, especially in mangrove trees which at the front of a mangrove, and especially in northwestern Australia, where you get these enormous tides, so somewhere like Broome, at the mangroves at the front of a creek, you'll find that a lot of the leaves on the front mangrove trees are covered with barnacles there, and you can walk by when it's low tide, and of course if it's an 11-metre tide, you're looking up at a tree with barnacles on it thinking, that's really odd, but of course they're covered at high tide by seawater, so they feed. This is a strange slab. It's actually a sea urchin with two little barnacles on it, and these are absolutely naked. They don't even have any plates on their heads, so that's taken the reduction of those plates on the head down to an absolute maximum of reduction. This is another type of barnacle which lives on crabs. You might find when you buy your swimming crabs from the fishmonger, sometimes you've got barnacles on them, these sorts. And then these are sea fans, Gorgonians. And this Gorgonian, this is a barnacle. It just looks like a big wart or something. And what happens is the Gorgonian secretes part of itself over the barnacle, but the barnacle opening keeps open here. The little cirri that we talked about with the hairs, they manage to always keep the opening clean. And so the feeding area will come out of here. And this is one here which has been cleaned up a bit, and you can see that the barnacles, when this has been peeled off, and there are the barnacles, and that's where they'll be feeding. So again, they live in really weird areas. So Charles Darwin, I think Charles Darwin is my hero in many, many ways, and he spent 5 years on HMS Beagle, going around the world on that famous voyage. And during that time, he went to South America, and it was there that he actually saw lots and lots of barnacles and became very interested in barnacles, different shapes and sizes, different lifestyles, and began to really collect them. And then on the way back, they came through King George Sound, and I still get the shivers when I'm in King George Sound collecting barnacles, hoping that I'm somewhere that Charles Darwin might have once, collected a barnacle. And he took all this enormous collection of barnacles back to Britain. He worked on them for 8 years, and this study of barnacles was really the breeding ground for his ideas of evolution and species. And that was when he was formulating all his ideas for his great book, The Origin of Species. And he ended up publishing his work on barnacles. He looked at all the fossil barnacles and the living or extant barnacles of the world, and he published them in these 4 volumes. 2 volumes in 51, which were on the fossil barnacles, and 2 in 54, which were on the living barnacles. And altogether, from Australia, he found 34 species, and he described some new ones. So when I started working on barnacles here in the 80s, that was about what was known in Australia of new species and barnacles. Currently, we know that we've got more than 300 species, and we've described a lot of new species, and we still have drawers and drawers and drawers and drawers and drawers of new species to describe. And we will be bringing this up well up towards 400 quite easily, because there's so much deep water exploration going on at the moment. So, but Darwin's work is still the seminal work that we use. It stood the test of time. It stood the test of the rigour of a lot of modern science. But basically, the classification and his ideas are really what we're still using. So I think that's why he's my hero. Okay. He also talked about barnacles, excuse me, as his beloved barnacles, because he would walk around Down House, and he had a certain path that he used to walk around on, certain stepping stones, when he wanted to think about his barnacles. So sometimes they were his beloved barnacles, but sometimes they probably weren't his beloved barnacles, because if you read his correspondence, he found them very frustrating sometimes. Okay, so this is where in Albany it gives me the sort of nice shivers, because these are the two species of barnacles he actually found in that area. This is the species that I showed you earlier that was in the shadow of the rocks. This one is very hard to find. It's actually a Storked Barnacle that actually lives on the shore. This is a very unusual place for it to be, but it's on the shore. But these are very small animals, very, very small animals. And so you can stand on top of a fissure and not realise you're standing on top of these little guys. And here they are. They've got naked stalks, and they've actually got more sort of hairy plates. And they're, again, quite primitive. But, again, they were found by Charles Darwin. So, barnacles have got a bad reputation with people who have boats. And this is, you know, the sort of fouling that you get on boats and underwater structures, and the damage that it can do to boats, to the surface underneath. And huge amounts of money are spent trying to get rid of barnacles, trying to develop paints which stop barnacles growing. These are some of the barnacles that were actually on Perry Benoom. That's on the keel of a yacht. This is a fouling species called Megablanus cocopoma, which we've recently found in Australia, which is a South American species, which is a well-known fouler, but we've now been able to confirm that it is actually in the waters of Western Australia. And that's quite a large species, so that little par there would sort of be about this big. And so people say that you can get up to 3,000 tonnes of fouling on some of these very large boats. So it causes quite a huge problem in terms of economics, because it slows the boat down. You have to keep anti-fouling your boat by putting paints on it. You have to try and scrape the barnacles off. And so there's a huge amount of research going into paints, trying to see how you can stop barnacles. Now, a lot of the anti-fouling paints used to have arsenic and lead in them. Most of those have been banned now, because not only did they kill the barnacles, but they went into the water around them, and it killed everything else in the marine environment around them. So that's not good. And some of them had very bad effects on some mollusks. For instance, they were something called intersex, where the actual females grow male organs, and so it causes a lot of problems. So the species die out. So now there's a lot more biologically friendly paints being looked at. And one of the interesting things is that they're looking at something from chili peppers. And some of the old fishermen used to tell me, oh, you know, I keep my anti-fouling going and make it last longer by putting in chili powder or by putting in curry powder. So it's really interesting now to see these paint companies who are coming out with new paints for anti-fouling which have got derivatives of chili in them. So there must have been something in what those old fishermen knew. Thanks, Catherine. And these are just some of the common fouling species that if you had boats you might even know that you get these and these on your boats. This is very common, for instance, in the Swan River in Perth, and has probably been brought in at the time of when the first people arrived, because you find this, it's called Ballan or Amphibalanus ampitrite. You find it around the world. It's well known. This is one called Balanus trigonus, which if you buy mussels, if you buy any mussels and you find little pink and white jobs on them, they're actually these little barnacles, and they are in the shellfish industry, and so because of that have been transported from country to country. So they are just a universal one that you find around the world. Some are the more naturally occurring ones, like some of the Storked Barnacles. Again, you find those on your boats, on any buoy ropes. This is one we've recently found from just up north, and that was from an area where there were iron ore boats coming in, and that's a new species to Australia. It's a known species from elsewhere up in the Malaysian, Indonesian archipelago, but we now have that in the waters of Australia. We've confirmed that. This is another species. This is something called Barnacles reticulatus. That is a known species from Japan, and now this is very much settled in the northwest of WA in the intertidal because of all the plying of vessels between Japan and Australia with the oil and gas LNG trade. And this is actually now in the intertidal and smothering some of the barnacles that are the natural inhabitants of the intertidal areas up there. So, which may be potentially a bit of a pest problem in the future, but it's something we need to look at. The good sides of barnacles. So some people eat barnacles, and this is a very large barnacle. It's about this big. It's called Balanus nubilis, and it used to be the favourite food of the American Indians, and people still in the States eat this, and they make chowders of them or they steam them. And there's a similar species eaten by people in South America. And in fact, Cocopoma, that species that I said from South America that was just introduced into Australia, that's also eaten by people and steamed by people in South America, or sometimes they even put it into some of those little cooking pits and eat them that way. And what they do is they bring the animal out by its funny little cirri, and they just eat the body, which is basically eating the testes and the ovary. And it's supposed to be an Epicurean delight, and it's supposed to taste a little bit like lobster. I've not tried myself. And there's some Storked Barnacles too, which are eaten in South America, or if you go to places like Spain or some Mediterranean countries, you can also have those as a delicacy. And people have also told me about eating the barnacles we saw, the Storked Barnacles with the naked stems that you can find on buoys and boats, that people eat those. And people have told me there used to be a restaurant in the Swan River in Perth where people used to sell the stalks of those deep fried, and you could eat them there. But I haven't been in Perth forever, so I don't know. So I don't know if anybody would ever remember that. But if you know anybody who does remember, I'd be really interested to know about it. Next one, please. And one of the final things, good things about barnacles, is their cement. You know, we were talking about those funny little larvae that settle down on their heads. Well, their cement hardens very quickly within a matter of minutes when it settles down, and then the animal can't move. And barnacles, even when the animal is dead, they stay stuck for a long time, and it's a very tenacious, hard plastic. It's supposed to be twice as strong as the plastics and glues that they use when they're making spaceships. And if you can heat it up or you can chill it. And I keep meaning to change these to centigrade, but I'm sorry these are in Fahrenheit, but that was from the original work. But you can heat them up and chill them, and it doesn't crack. It still retains its integrity. And so space scientists are very interested in this as a glue because of space craft going through all those different temperature changes when they launch them and when they come back to Earth. But also people like dentists and bone surgeons are very interested in them because it's a biological glue. Dentists especially because obviously when this settles and the glue comes out, it's a glue that sets underwater. So if you wanted to stick a tooth into your mouth, which is a moist environment, if you could get a barnacle cement, you could just go thunk, and within 4 minutes it's there forever, type of thing. So there's a lot of research that's been going on into the structure of the protein, of the cement, and they found that it's made of a lot of proteins with a little bit of carbohydrate. But nobody's been able to actually simulate it, to make it. One of the latest things that's just happened in this last year, some research has been done on it to show that they're trying to work out how it sets, and they found that when it's set, it sets as just like when you've wounded yourself and you get a clot of blood and then you have scab formation, and the same processes that happen in that. When you have the blood comes out and it triggers off some enzyme reaction, and the enzyme reaction makes your blood cells make some fibres which stick the blood cells together, and then that makes your scab. Well, they found exactly the same process is what happens when the cement sets, and in fact the little enzymes which are involved are very, very similar to our blood clotting and scab formation enzymes. And so there's this very interesting evolutionary question, are we descended from barnacles? I mean, so, no, it's just one of these really, really interesting things. There's a lot of interest going on in those areas at the moment. Thanks. And then just to finish up with barnacles and forensics, and I guess that's a little area I've been involved in, and I find a very interesting area. Because if you, for instance, you've got a boat that's bringing drugs into Australia, the police want to know where that boat has come from, especially if it's picked up drugs on the way. And so lots of times I've been asked to look at various boats and look at the barnacles on them. Because if you're a drug person and you're questioned about where you've come from, you might say, oh, I've come up from Antarctica, or, but I've definitely not been through India, or something like this. But the barnacles on the boat can actually tell you areas where people have been from. So that's one area that we get actually involved in. Another area is a sort of sadder area when you find things like lifeboats from boats that have gone down, and there was a boat that went down many years ago off the coast here, and a lifeboat was found and it had barnacles on it, and we had to ascertain how long that lifeboat had been in the water and where it had been, or things like aircraft crashes when you have bits of wings of aircraft with barnacles on it, to see if you know how long that's been in the water. So it can be related to a particular area where an aircraft went down, or something like that. We've also had Skylab when it crashed in WA many, many years ago now. But Nassau people were around and they brought some of the remains of it because it washed up on the beach, the remains of Skylab 1 week actually after the crash. They brought these remains to the museum, and it was a fibrous floating material which had been part of the nose cone, and it had 2 species of barnacles on it, and 2 of those little stalked barnacles, the ones with the little naked stalks. And so we we could authenticate, yes, that had been in for a week, and we knew that it had exactly been for a week, but it had these two species growing, and one of them was nearly a centimetre high, which is quite a growth rate for something small like that in a week. And I always like to tease people saying, well, it just proves that, you know, goose barnacles have aerial larvae, because it must have picked them up as it came down. But we also get bodies. You know, if a body is floating in the sea, and it still has flesh on it, barnacles tend to attach to its feet or its hands, and so we do have that sort of gruesome side sometimes of looking at bodies. And I think end up with my funny leg story. And many years ago now, I was asked by the police to look at a leg. It was half a leg. It came from, you know, it was from here downwards, which was in the Swan River, and there were bones of a leg, but on the end of the leg there was a sock, and the sock had a barnacle on it, and they asked me to look at it because they wanted to know how long it had been in the river. And we could tell that the barnacle on it was mature, but it wasn't scratched or anything, so it was probably one of the rapidly growing barnacles, and it reaches maturity about 3 months. So we knew around about at least 3 months. And the police were very happy with that, and they said, oh, we think we know whose leg that is. So they proceeded to ring up this particular person and literally say, well, we've found your leg. And they were chatting away to this man, and they begin to look a bit perplexed, and so they put the phone down. They said, he says it's not his leg. Now, why did he know it wasn't his leg? The sock, because he was a windsurfer, and windsurfers don't have socks. So with that little homily, thank you very much for coming today. I hope that if you came thinking barnacles were pests, I hope you've come away thinking that they're actually quite interesting animals, and they might even be beautiful animals. Thank you very much.